Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinions to improve dairy farm performance. Following on from our insight into Olin Greenan's dairy farming career, we hear how the 2021-22 milking season has fared and the challenges he encounters, some common and different to those we face in Ireland.
Our calving starts in the early July period, and we'd have cows calving then to, this sounds weird, doesn't it, to cows calving until early to mid-September. Then on the 5th of October, we start our breeding season, so we have a 10-week breeding season. Then the bulls go out on the 5th of November, and then that's coincides, which I'd call the sort of easier part of the season, coming into Christmas. And then, unfortunately, climatic conditions would dictate we'd switch to 3 and 2 or once a day milking just before Christmas, and then the long haul of the long summer lasts. So normally you'd aim to still milk until the end of April. However, that's been disrupted the last number of years with harsher summers, basically. But just want to speak a little bit about this year's been a bit of a mongrel, and there's an old saying here in New Zealand: you never get a good high milk price and a good season together. The stars never seem to align. But we had a very slow August, just a slow pre-balance day growth, and as a consequence of that, we left a bit behind for us and dropped some production, and unfortunately even affected our reproduction. So generally speaking, we're sitting around that we'd be targeting, or we'd be achieving a 76% 6 week in calf rate. So just that's not 6 week calving rate, it's 6 weeks in calf. Yeah. And empty rate was sitting around 8 to 78% at 10 weeks. So we were very happy with that, tipping along at that. But this year, unfortunately, probably as a consequence of the harsher spring, we ended up 73% 6 weeks, and our empty rate jumped to 11%. So got a bit of work to do there. It was disappointing because I felt we had a nice tight system, and it could just show how quickly that hard work can unravel. So it'll just make us refocus for next year. Anyway, so we sat behind at one stage. We're 9% behind for the season. Season was going okay. It was a slow start, and then it seemed to be normal. And then December was okay. We got a bit of a dollop of rain, but we normally go once a day mid-January. But this year, I just wanted to trial with something we tend to seem, and this will be touching on that share milk and owner relationship. It has to be an agreed thing, but I think we felt we left a run too late. And the key with going once a day, particularly in a dry summer context, is to transition while you still have ample feed. Anyway, I was curious to dabble with 3 and 2 milkings this year, so got the agreement to go ahead the 15th of December. But there was a two-pronged approach to that reason. We was just trying to keep that production a little bit higher, and B, we wanted to look at something more people friendly, and as a result of that, over Christmas. So our regime was the 3 and 2. Just to clarify, we'd milk normal times on day one, so we'd milk at 5:30 a.m. in the morning, 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon, and then the second day will be a 10 a.m. milking. So what that then meant is that staff were getting a sleep in every second morning, and then they were getting every second afternoon off. But what we actually found as a result of that, particularly in the hotter days, we were getting more productivity in the morning. We're starting at 7 o'clock, and we had a steady 2.5 hours of work to do when the temperature was lovely and low compared to being out there in the heat of the day. So it worked really, really well. And over Christmas, particularly, it worked really, really well from a people point of view. The cows, I think we were doing 1.4 milk solids when we transitioned over, and dropped to 1.35. So you can pretty much say it was a moot point. Carried that on for just over a month, hoping it could keep going, but the dry conditions just pummeled us, and we had to drop to once a day then in at the middle of January.
And to look at it all in, I suppose, in the broader picture, can you talk us through, I suppose, grass supply and feed management, say from when you start calving in mid-July, early to mid-July?
Yeah, so we we have been managing. So we target 23. Well, our target's 2,300 on the that's total available. So you can take 1,500 of that. But on the 1st of July or the start of calving, and the last 4 years on this farm, 3 years on this farm, we just about sneak by with no supplements. We might have there might be a 10-day period where a couple of kilos of cow off grass silage would go in, and probably just reflecting on this past season, I'm probably a bit stubborn getting out of the traps and putting supplements in, and that there's probably just a discipline or ill discipline I have, just reluctant to put that feed in. And normally I seem to wing my way and get away with it, and it doesn't affect fertility, but probably should have tipped something in there a bit sooner. So on a normal point of view, we aim to be grass only, all through calving, all through the mating period. And I suppose just touching on that, that's a kind of a tactical maneuver in some sense. If you get your system right from autumn previously, and the weather plays its part, and you get your cover built up, the time that you can free up with, if you think people that milk too long or don't have the right roundlet set up, then they end up having to feed supplements during calving when you're already busy. So with a bit of thought, you can actually save a lot of labor in that busy time, provided the climate is favorable. So sorry, then we'd get to Christmas, we'd make a bit of surplus. Our nitrogen use here about 130 kgs of N per hectare, so it's probably below average in the Waikato. Stock to 3 cows to the hectare here. So we make a little bit of baleage silage, but what we do, we grow maize silage for the summer, and that's we'll probably be lost without it this last few years. And it's interesting when you look at the whole stocking rate thing, you everything we do from now to the 31st of December is spot on. You couldn't fault it, but it's the real challenge in our system now here is post Christmas, and that's that summer. The typical summers have went from 6 week of dry to nearly 10 weeks, and we haven't actually changed our system. You can't really drop your stocking rate because you lose that pasture utilization pre-Christmas. But we're just trying to find a way. So we're trying a few things. We've started growing forage rape as a summer crop. So that's yielding quite well, about 14 tonne a hectare. So that just gives us a bit of protein in the summer, but haven't just got there yet. This year, I just want to sort of close off this year. We stayed on once a day. We had intermittent rain throughout the summer. It would keep things alive. And then we dried off 20th of April, 6% behind last year, but the rain had stopped and we ended up with probably one of the driest maize that I can recall. And consequence of that is we're now sitting with cover below 1,800, 2 weeks away from when it should be 2,300. So we're not in a great position at the moment, but it's not from any wrongdoing. We're out on a 80-day rotation pretty much from end of April. So it's not pretty at the moment, but as been farming long enough, I think you'll plan for the worst and hope for the best a little bit, because that's all we can do now.
And your 2,300, Olin, that you like to open with at the start of calving, that would have been a fairly normal figure in Ireland, but we are in the situation now where we have compact calving and higher stocking rates on farm, that we're actually pushing that up to 1,000 and in some cases 1,100. So that would be 2,500, 2,600 for you. Have you ever considered that opening with more cover, or is that considered a waste in your system?
Yeah, I'm sorry, a couple of years by default we had that going into calving. That was just serious growth in June, ended up with covers of 25.50. It's not the end of the world, but you got to be careful, because you can end up with a lot of, you can't get through all that heavy covers with dry cows. So I suppose that the 23, 24 in a normal year seems to get us through. But it's interesting what you're saying there about compacting the calving. People would say, oh, you need to calve earlier, but my argument is, well, that's a very loose statement, isn't it? Because the person that calves earlier, the person that calves later will still have might have an earlier mean calving date than the guy that calves early was sprawled out. So people need to be careful with how they analyze that. But as you say as well, you're running a higher geared system then with the compact calving. It's great. And in some ways, it's led to some people pushing the calving date a little bit later for that reason you've mentioned. They want to get the calving done and condensed and all the associated positive things of that for, days calve pre-mating. But it does put a big pinch on the feed supply. So you do ride the wind a little bit closer, with the compact calving thing, certainly calving early.
And the supplements you've mentioned now are grass silage, maize and fodder rape. Where does concentrate feed come into your system, Olin?
Yeah, so we would feed, we would feed a little bit of palm kernel. I think, what have we fed this year? 150, 200 kgs a cow, or not even 150, I think, per cow. And I would use that just primarily for autumn condition replenishing. We haven't got any facilities for feeding them, so there's no sort of there's no lure or tendency to use that. So that's one good thing. And our systems probably biologically could still exist without it, and that's something I'm hoping to phase out as well. So that's tipped in the dry summers and the autumn. And it is good to put condition back on cows. So that's I probably should have fed some this spring with the milk price if we knew what it was going to be. But it's primarily maize silage, which is low in protein, and this is the challenge we have in the summer. We don't have enough pasture silage and high protein to carry us through, and it's making me sort of think, well, instead of palm kernel, do we grow less maize, buy in more bulk grass silage, which is higher in protein? So these are the sort of conversations a lot of farmers are currently having now, that the realization that the last couple of summers here have been pretty tough.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, and I guess the weather conditions and prolonged or harsh weather conditions are something that we all have to contend with, and maybe slightly adjust the system to align with it. I suppose following on from that, then you mentioned winter time. Are your cows on farm for the winter? You mentioned there's no sheds. So what is the management of them over winter?
Yeah, we're quite lucky in the Waikato here, and we're farming on peat soils, which I will give out stink about in the summer. That with the high soil temperatures, just ryegrass, pasture persistency is a massive problem for us here with those drier challenges. Although the silver lining on that is that it takes a lot to get the peat wet, so we're quite lucky here from a winter point of view, that it's very easy. And I do remember arriving here and coming from a wet farm in Clevedon. People were saying you won't have to stand cows off, it won't be an issue. And I remember the first weekend I was here, there was 80 millimeters of rain forecasted, and it was actually the day after we arrived, and I had no facilities. I didn't know what I was going to do for standing off. And I remember dreading the next morning, and I went out and I thought, wow, where's the rain? The ground had just soaked it up. So that's fine as long as you don't have a really wet winter. But no, so we don't winter off, thankfully. Everything historically we've had everything on pasture only, just maintenance 8 to 9 kgs. I should just comment there, we're on a Frisian crossbred herd. Sure, we're about 480 kgs. So we're able to, if we get the system set up right, we're able to run those through on all grass. Unfortunately, this year won't be the case. And without thinking too hard about it, it's going to be interesting. The next 6 weeks is going to be interesting between now and calving as to how we're going to manage covers and how we're going to manage post-calving covers and all those sorts of things.
So if we turn our attention, Olin, to production, then you mentioned you're calving from early July, and you're going to dry, on a good and normal year by April. So can you tell us about lactation length and production per cow?
Yeah, so I suppose when we look at our business, production per cow, yes, it's a KPI, but it's not probably top of the list. And that's just, I suppose, following research and looking at things, I suppose, in areas, production per cow is the residual effect of how you do all the other things well. So I'm talking more about, maintaining your low cost of production, harvesting your pasture, just getting your cost structure set up right. However, we are achieving those fertility results. We're tricking along. We'd peak at 2 milk solids per cow. We'd hold that for maintaining. But the summers is our biggest challenge. And as I mentioned before, everything we're doing is pretty good. And by the textbook up to December. And once summer comes, we just bottom out so much. And as a matter of fact, that's forcing us to look at how do we reduce that post-Christmas decline? Because the reality this year we've done 350 a cow. That's not. We'd like to have that a little bit higher. And as a share milker, that's your asset, so you want to push them as well as you can. But I'm also aware of some of the pitfalls of chasing that utopia as well. So I think I mentioned, we need to revisit. We need to have a conversation about farm systems here in the Waikato, particularly in the summers, because we've got drier summers now. If we go by the true tested grazing principles, just your demand is too high in the summer, and we just need to crack a nut as to how we can address that.
And on that, the farm system, like there's a huge amount of discipline now. As you mentioned earlier, maybe there's an ill discipline in that you should have gone in with a little bit of supplement earlier, during that rough spell in the month of August. But particularly in a year like this, you're in the same position as we are. Milk price is so buoyant for farmers, and in some ways there's the temptation to drive on production. For your system, your core principle is grass utilization. So how do you maintain discipline? What is the trigger for you to say, no, we're not going to go in with extra palm kernel, or we're not going to go in with extra silage to push things on? We're going to stick to plan and go to once a day, or the 3 and 2 milking.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because also if you just consider our situation, we're not the sole decision maker from a farm system point of view. So you've got your farm owner who may have slightly different philosophies on how you want to farm. And I guess in this particular farm, I was quite lucky in the sense that the stars somewhat aligned when I got here. We had a really mild winter. We had a fantastic early spring. We had a fantastic year up to Christmas. And we just nailed everything out of the textbook as far as grass only, harvested some grass. And then we managed to replicate that year on year, and the owners then could realize, man, there's consistency here, and you could pretty much write in your cost. You could nearly year on year, our costs were pretty much identical. So they were starting to like this sort of consistency. The thing starts to get a little bit distorted when you're on the height of a high milk price, because it's very, very easy to start doing some marginal analysis of tipping up feed and that. And this is where, and I mentioned about, luckily there's no facilities here, because if the scenario was the owners decided to invest in feeding facility, well, straight away all those principles are getting threatened. Maybe threatened is a strong word, but the fact there's nothing here, it's a lot easier to stay on par with what you're trying to do. However, we've definitely got a tactical adjustment to do in the summer, and as to how we fill that, I'm not sure, because I think I mentioned we can't drop our stocking rate, because the front end of the season, we're going to lose all those benefits of good grazing pressure and good utilization, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, it'll be a technical introduction of maybe additional feed, but I would imagine we won't go down the infrastructure route, because my fear would be if we go down that route, the owner then will want a system change, and then we're going to move our cost structure probably another tier, and then in the event we know milk prices will go back down, we get ourselves locked into that.
What are the key challenges that you have faced, and how has it impacted on how your practice in farming, or you have evolved your practices over the years?
Probably quite lucky that there's never been any major challenges that have sort of made me question what I was doing. We've talked quite a bit about the $3.80 payout. That probably was the hardest period, and in everyone's eyes as well. We just started our family, and there was, I suppose, you sort of, at that time you're your family's dependent on you to provide a living for them. So that was quite challenging, and probably as well coinciding just with the challenges of that farm, and maybe our business growth quite stagnant. That was probably the hardest period, but at the time I probably didn't realize that. So just looking back on that maybe the most difficult thing, I guess, the evolution of many things here. But I think the important thing is you have to evolve with them, and if you can evolve with the evolution of these things, it doesn't seem as an abrupt a change. I mean, when I came here first in the year 2001, I remember not long in my tenure here, we TB tested, and this guy just rocked up in a ute in a truck and stuck an injection under the cow's tail and said he'd be back. He asked how many cows have you got, and someone said, "Oh, roughly, I think there's about this many." That's cool. Be back a couple of days later and read them, and not a single tag was read at all. And I just said, "Wow, that's unbelievable." But even there was no electronic, radio frequency tags at that time. So we now have a national animal tracing system with the NATE system, and that's I guess that's been improved since the outbreak of M. bovis. So we've come a long way with traceability. The animal welfare thing, it's certainly something that we're all well aware of, and you can get disillusioned about it and annoyed about it, but at the end of the day, our consumers are, there's so much transparency now. They can see so much of what we do that we need to be so very, very careful of how we produce and how we look after our animals. But we need to take that as an opportunity to showcase how good we do things, because it can be used as a point of difference in a marketing context. I guess the two bigger, the big things on our environment right now, I guess, is the methane, the greenhouse gas emissions, and maybe not so much the nitrogen. Nitrogen leaching's a little bit in the topic, but it's probably a more localized conversation with water quality. However, the methane thing is in a global context is a big question. But I have no doubt that farmers globally are very innovative, and no doubt there's people working tirelessly at the moment to try and find some form of intervention in an animal context to alleviate some of that. But we're in a very peculiar place at the moment when the word food security has been used, and it's disappointing to think we're in the world now that term has been used. But we're dare I say it, though, it was nearly needed for people to appreciate where the food comes from. But I just wonder how far wanting to be green and making sure that we're stewarding the land and whatnot. But at what point does food availability and food security become more important? So it's a very interesting time. It's not a nice time, don't get me wrong, but it's just going to be interesting how that whole thing plays out over the next little while.
Yeah, and it's an interesting balance, because absolutely there is a green agenda, and then there is the balance, and I suppose it's a lot closer to home for us right now than you, but an awful lot of the grain and fertilizer is coming from the likes of Ukraine and Russia, and that has somewhat halted at the moment. So there's huge question marks over I suppose the impact of that on the amount of food that is going to be circulating. Just a final point on you mentioned nitrogen, and earlier on you said you're spreading 130 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. Is that a normal number, and has that declined over time, in terms of your system?
No, so it's interesting. So the government, maybe it's 2 years now, signalled a cap on synthetic N of 190 kgs per hectare. And it was quite a significant signal, that because it was the first time that there was a directive placed on farmers, whereas previously everything was sort of farmer output led. It was a sort of farmer output driven decision rather than the other way around. So it was quite an interesting thing at the time. However, 190 is probably, if you think of your Canterbury system where they're growing 17, 18 tons of pasture, and they've got water in abundance. They're going to get constantly getting response for nitrogen applications with the water availability. Some of their system, and they've built a system around that, stocked at 3.5 cows to the hectare and whatnot, because they can meet that supply. The demand is equal to the supply. However, in our system, we ironically, as it might seem, we're not physically able to put any more. Our limiting factor is lack of moisture. So if we go our dry period from January to this year till May, so that's 5 months of your farming calendar year that you can't put anything on. Then if we're only stocked at 3 cows to the hectare, you only want to be trickling on 30 units after your cows, unless you want a massive surplus, which is not the easiest thing in the world. I've seen some years we'd put a lot of N on in November, and then you take out a huge chunk of area for silage, and then the next thing the rain goes away, and it hasn't happened, but you'd end up having to feed it back out. So yeah, no, it hasn't affected their system, and it won't affect their system. But I'd rather be putting on a little bit more and growing a bit more pasture, but it's pennies from heaven. We need to be able to do that.
Absolutely. This has been such an interesting conversation, Olin, and thoroughly enjoyable. As I say, you're so far away, but it's just such a similar challenges and aspects of farming that face Irish farmers on a day-to-day basis. We'd like to wish you the very best of luck for the rest of the dry period, and we hope grass production picks up ahead of calving start date in July. Thank you, Olin.
Thanks, Emma-Louise. Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Olin Greenan for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.